Hello family, welcome to Stories with Storytime. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you, as you do. Jonathan and Olivia were known far and wide as one of the wealthiest couples in Atlanta. They lived in a mansion so grand that people would stop to admire its towering gates and shining windows. Their wealth was the stuff of legends, but behind the marble walls of their mansion, things were far from perfect. Jonathan and Olivia had been married for 15 long years, but it wasn't love that brought them together. Their marriage was arranged by their powerful families to strengthen business ties, and from the beginning, they treated their union as a contract. More than a relationship. Both of them were proud, stubborn, and unwilling to compromise. They each believed they were better than the other, and neither was willing to back down. To the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect couple, but inside their home they barely spoke, and when they did, it was always to argue. The real source of conflict, however, began when Jonathan's family started pressuring him for something only he could provide: an heir. They wanted a child to carry on the family name, someone to inherit the vast wealth and empire they had built. Jonathan, too, began to feel the weight of the expectation. He had everything: money, power, and a beautiful wife, but without a child, his family's legacy felt incomplete. One night, while sitting in the quiet, cold dining room, Jonathan gathered the courage to ask Olivia about having children. She had been avoiding the topic for years, and now at nearly 40 years old, it was becoming urgent. "Olivia," Jonathan began, his voice thick with the weight of the conversation he dreaded. "It's been 15 years. My family is constantly asking when we'll have a child. I think it's time." Olivia, who was idly flipping through a fashion magazine, barely looked up. "A child? Now? Why should I go through all that stress just to ruin my body?" she scoffed. "I want to maintain my figure. I worked hard for this. I'm not about to let pregnancy change that." Jonathan was stunned by her cold response. "But we need an heir, Olivia. You know how important it is for the family. Everyone expects us to." "Who cares what everyone expects?" Olivia interrupted, glaring at him. "You think I want to ruin my body just because your family wants a baby? I'm not a fool. I like how I look, and I want to keep it that way." Jonathan's frustration grew. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "You care more about your appearance than the future of this family. I can't believe this." Olivia rose from her chair, her eyes narrowing in anger. "Don't raise your voice at me, Jonathan. I didn't marry you for love. I married you for wealth, just like you married me for status. If you want children so badly, go find someone else to carry them. I'm not interested." The coldness in Olivia's words was like a slap in the face. Jonathan stood there speechless as she stormed off to her separate bedroom. It was no secret that they hadn't shared the same room in years. Their marriage was nothing more than a formality, an arrangement to keep up appearances. For the next few weeks, the silence between them grew thicker. Jonathan was filled with anger and frustration, while Olivia remained indifferent. She spent her days shopping, attending parties, and flaunting her wealth to anyone who would listen. She cared little for the idea of family, motherhood, or the pressures that weighed on Jonathan's shoulders. In the evenings, Jonathan would leave the house, finding comfort in the arms of other women. He justified his actions by telling himself that Olivia didn't care about him, so why should he care about her? Meanwhile, Olivia did the same. She had her own affairs, her own secrets, and she made no effort to hide them. Their loveless marriage became a quiet battlefield, both of them pretending not to notice how far they had drifted from each other. They were two strangers bound only by wealth and pride, living under the same roof but in completely different worlds. As the pressure mounted on Jonathan to produce an heir, his frustration turned into desperation. His family wouldn't stop asking, and he could no longer hide behind excuses. Yet every time he tried to bring up the subject with Olivia, it ended in a fight. She was adamant. She had no desire to have children, and was perfectly happy maintaining her figure and her luxurious lifestyle. One evening, after another argument, Jonathan found himself standing alone in the grand, empty living room of their mansion. He looked around at the vast space, The expensive furniture, the crystal chandeliers, and the marble floors, and it all felt meaningless. What was the point of all this wealth if there was no one to share it with, no children to pass it on to, no love to make it feel like a home? Olivia finally decided that she no longer wanted to deal with Jonathan directly, as he had begun to irritate her. So she hired a new maid who would help her convey any message she wanted to send him. One hot afternoon, while flipping through applications sent by the housekeeping agency, Olivia's eyes landed on the name Jasmine. The resume was simple. Jasmine was a young woman from a poor background, no impressive qualifications, but she had experience working as a housemaid in other wealthy homes. "She'll do," Olivia said, tossing Jasmine's application aside as she instructed her personal assistant to call and hire her. A few days later, Jasmine arrived. She was a quiet, unassuming young woman, barely 22 years old, with soft features and wide, nervous eyes. Her skin was a warm caramel tone, her hair always tied back in a neat bun, and she dressed in simple clothes that spoke of her modest upbringing. Despite her humble appearance, she had an air of determination about her. A quiet strength that Olivia didn't notice at first, but would come to envy later. Olivia didn't waste any time introducing Jasmine to her duties. The young maid was responsible for cleaning her room and her husband's room, since the couple no longer spoke directly to one another. Jasmine became the bridge between them. Whenever Olivia needed to communicate with Jonathan, she would send Jasmine a message, and the same went for Jonathan, who used Jasmine to relay messages to his wife. At first, Jasmine was just grateful for the job. She had been out of work for months, and this opportunity was a blessing, even though the mansion's cold, tense atmosphere made her uneasy. More importantly, the money from this job would help her sick mother, who was in the hospital battling an illness that required expensive treatment. For Jasmine, failure was not an option. She needed to keep this job, no matter what. Jasmine worked tirelessly to meet the couple's impossible standards. Olivia barely acknowledged her presence, except to bark orders or hand her lists of things to buy. Jasmine's mornings were spent polishing the marble floors, dusting the grand chandeliers, and ensuring Olivia's room remained perfectly pristine. Jonathan, on the other hand, was different. Unlike Olivia, who treated Jasmine like a shadow, Jonathan often watched her as she worked, his eyes following her as she moved through the rooms. At first, Jasmine didn't notice his lingering stares, too focused on her tasks, but soon she began to feel his presence more keenly. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her, something that made her skin crawl. One evening, as Jasmine was cleaning Jonathan's room, he appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a smirk on his face. "You've been doing a good job, Jasmine," Jonathan said, his voice low and smooth. "The house hasn't looked this good in a long time." Jasmine paused, wiping her hands on her apron as she stood nervously by the bed. "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing my best." Jonathan stepped into the room, his eyes still fixed on her. "You know I appreciate hard work. Not everyone in this house does. It's nice to have someone who listens and gets things done." Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. She forced a smile, trying to remain polite. "I'm glad I could help." But Jonathan didn't leave. He moved closer, his presence filling the room. "You're a good girl, Jasmine. You deserve to be treated well. Don't let anyone here make you feel less than that." Jasmine's heart raced. She didn't know how to respond, so she mumbled something about needing to finish her work and hurried out of the room as quickly as possible. From that moment on, she made every effort to avoid being alone with Jonathan. But it wasn't always easy. He had a way of finding her, of cornering her when Olivia wasn't around. One night, while the house was quiet and Olivia was away on another trip, Jonathan caught Jasmine alone in the kitchen. He approached her, his footsteps soft but deliberate. "Jasmine," he said, his voice sending a shiver down her spine. She turned to face him, trying to hide her fear. "You don't have to be afraid of me. I just want to talk." But his intentions were far from innocent. Before Jasmine could react, Jonathan grabbed her arm, his grip firm and unrelenting. The fear she had been trying to push away now consumed her, but no matter how much she struggled, she couldn't break free. That night, Jonathan raped Jasmine, leaving her broken and terrified. Afterward, Jonathan threatened her, his voice cold and menacing. If you tell anyone about this, you'll regret it. I'll make sure you lose this job, and with my influence, I'll make sure you never work anywhere else. You might even find yourself in jail." Jasmine, devastated and frightened for her life, had no choice but to keep silent. She knew that without this job, her mother's treatment would stop, and she couldn't afford to let that happen. So she swallowed her pain, buried her shame, and went back to work as though nothing had happened. Jasmine's world seemed to collapse around her when she discovered she was pregnant. She sat alone in her tiny room, staring at the small bump that was beginning to form on her belly, wondering how her life had spiraled so terribly out of control. The terror of the situation weighed heavily on her. She was pregnant with the child of the man who had violated her, and there was no way to hide it forever. What was she going to do? She tried to go about her duties as normal, but the stress of keeping her secret hidden was overwhelming. Every time Jonathan glanced her way, her heart raced, terrified that he would somehow know she hadn't yet done what he demanded: get rid of the baby. He hadn't noticed yet, and for that, Jasmine was grateful, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he did. One evening, when Jasmine could no longer bear the weight of her burden, she gathered the courage to confront Jonathan. She waited until Olivia was out of the house, as she often was these days, off attending to her social circles. Jasmine entered Jonathan's office, her hands trembling, her voice barely a whisper, as she said, "Sir, I need to talk to you." Jonathan barely looked up from his desk, uninterested in what he assumed was another trivial matter. "What is it, Jasmine?" he asked, annoyance seeping into his voice. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine finally spoke the words she had been dreading. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, Jonathan didn't respond, his expression blank as if he hadn't quite heard her. But then his face twisted in anger. "What did you say?" Jasmine's knees felt weak, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I'm pregnant. I've been to the doctor, and it's too late to—" Before she could finish her sentence, Jonathan slammed his fist down on the table, his eyes blazing with fury. "You were supposed to take care of this. I gave you money to get rid of it. How could you let this happen?" Jasmine flinched at his outburst. "I tried, but the doctor said it's too far along. I could die if I try to remove it now." For a brief moment, Jonathan's anger faltered, replaced by a cold indifference. "You should have been more careful. You should have done something sooner." He stood up from his chair, towering over Jasmine. "I don't want this child. Do you hear me? I don't care what happens to you, but you will not drag me into your mess. My family will never accept a child from a nobody like you." Jasmine's heart shattered. The man who had assaulted her was now telling her that her baby, his baby, was nothing to him. She had expected as much, but hearing it from his lips made it all the more devastating. "I can't get rid of it now," Jasmine said, her voice shaking. "It's too late. The doctor said it could kill me." Jonathan narrowed his eyes, his face hardening with contempt. "That's not my problem, Jasmine, but I'm warning you, if you tell anyone, especially Olivia, about this, you'll regret it. I'll destroy you. You'll never work again, and I'll make sure your life becomes a living nightmare." Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes, but she nodded silently, knowing she was trapped. She had no choice but to endure this alone. As the months passed, Jasmine's pregnancy became harder to hide. Her once slim figure began to change, her belly swelling as the baby grew inside her. She wore loose clothing to cover it, but soon her secret was too obvious. Olivia, who had long ago stopped paying attention to Jasmine beyond giving her orders, began to notice something was different. It wasn't long before one of Olivia's friends made a remark that sent everything into motion. They were hosting a small gathering at the mansion when one of the women, known for her sharp tongue, leaned in close to Olivia and whispered, "Your maid Jasmine. She looks like she's put on quite a bit of weight. Are you sure she isn't pregnant?" Olivia's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Pregnant? That's ridiculous. She would never." But as the evening wore on, Olivia couldn't shake the comment from her mind. The next morning she watched Jasmine more closely, noticing how the girl moved with care, how her clothes seemed to strain at the seams. Suspicion gnawed at Olivia, and soon enough she called Jasmine into her room. Her cold eyes scanned the maid from head to toe as she asked, "Are you hiding something from me?" Jasmine froze, her hands trembling. "No, ma'am, I'm not. But Olivia wasn't convinced. Her voice turned sharp. "Don't lie to me. I know something is going on. Now tell me, are you pregnant?" There was no point in lying anymore. Jasmine's face paled as she nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, ma'am, I'm pregnant." Olivia's eyes widened in shock, but it didn't take long for the shock to give way to fury. You're pregnant? How could you? Who is responsible for this?" Jasmine remained silent, unable to form the words that would reveal the truth. But Olivia, quick-witted and suspicious, began to piece things together. The separate bedrooms, the tension between her and Jonathan, the way he had been acting around Jasmine. It hit her like a lightning bolt. "It was Jonathan, wasn't it?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Jasmine didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. Olivia exploded with rage, her hands shaking as she pointed toward the door. "Get out." For a brief moment, Jonathan's anger faltered, replaced by a cold indifference. "You should have been more careful. You should have done something sooner." He stood up from his chair, towering over Jasmine. "I don't want this child. Do you hear me? I don't care what happens to you, but you will not drag me into your mess. My family will never accept a child from a nobody like you." Jasmine's heart shattered. The man who had assaulted her was now telling her that her baby, his baby, was nothing to him. She had expected as much, but hearing it from his lips made it all the more devastating. "I can't get rid of it now," Jasmine said, her voice shaking. "It's too late. The doctor said it could kill me." Jonathan narrowed his eyes, his face hardening with contempt. "That's not my problem, Jasmine. But I'm warning you, if you tell anyone, especially Olivia, about this, you'll regret it. I'll destroy you. You'll never work again, and I'll make sure your life becomes a living nightmare." Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes, but she nodded silently, knowing she was trapped. She had no choice but to endure this alone. As the months passed, Jasmine's pregnancy became harder to hide. Her once slim figure began to change, her belly swelling as the baby grew inside her. She wore loose clothing to cover it, but soon her secret was too obvious. Olivia, who had long ago stopped paying attention to Jasmine beyond giving her orders, began to notice something was different. It wasn't long before one of Olivia's friends made a remark that sent everything into motion. They were hosting a small gathering at the mansion when one of the women, known for her sharp tongue, leaned in close to Olivia and whispered, "Your maid Jasmine. She looks like she's put on quite a bit of weight. Are you sure she isn't pregnant?" Olivia's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Pregnant? That's ridiculous. She would never." But as the evening wore on, Olivia couldn't shake the comment from her mind. The next morning, she watched Jasmine more closely, noticing how the girl moved with care, how her clothes seemed to strain at the seams. Suspicion gnawed at Olivia, and soon enough she called Jasmine into her room. Her cold eyes scanned the maid from head to toe as she asked, "Are you hiding something from me?" Jasmine froze, her hands trembling. "No, ma'am, I'm not." But Olivia wasn't convinced. Her voice turned sharp. "Don't lie to me. I know something is going on. Now tell me, are you pregnant?" There was no point in lying anymore. Jasmine's face paled as she nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, ma'am, I'm pregnant." Olivia's eyes widened in shock, but it didn't take long for the shock to give way to fury. You're pregnant. How could you? Who is responsible for this?" Jasmine remained silent, unable to form the words that would reveal the truth. But Olivia, quick-witted and suspicious, began to piece things together. The separate bedrooms, the tension between her and Jonathan, the way he had been acting around Jasmine. It hit her like a lightning bolt. "It was Jonathan, wasn't it?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Jasmine didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. Olivia exploded with rage, her hands shaking as she pointed toward the door. "Get out. I don't want to see your face again. You're fired. Get out of my house." Jasmine's heart sank as she realized she had nowhere to go. "Please, ma'am, I have nowhere else to turn. My mother is sick in the hospital, and I need this job to support her." Olivia's expression hardened. "That's not my problem. You can take your pregnancy and your sob story somewhere else. Leave now before I call security to throw you out." Jasmine, broken and defeated, packed her few belongings and left the mansion. Her lower back throbbed with every step, the pain a cruel reminder of the long days spent scrubbing marble floors and lifting heavy buckets. She had ignored it before, but now that she had nothing not even a bed to rest on. It gnawed at her constantly. She wandered the streets, her mind swirling with fear and uncertainty. She didn't know what to do or where to go. Her mother was still in the hospital, and without her job, Jasmine had no way to pay for the treatment her mother desperately needed. Days passed, and Jasmine's mother died, her illness worsening without proper care. Jasmine was left alone, grieving the loss of her mother while carrying the weight of her unborn child. As time went on, Jasmine gave birth to triplets, 3 beautiful boys who were the only light in her now dark world. But raising them wasn't easy without a job. She was forced to scrape by hawking goods on the streets just to feed her children. Passers-by often cast judgmental glances her way, some whispering or shaking their heads as she called out her prices. She heard the murmurs, "Young mother with no husband, what a shame." And though she kept her head down, the sting of their words never faded. Every day was a struggle for survival, and Jasmine often wondered how much more she could endure. Her body ached, her spirit worn thin, but she kept going, for them. Meanwhile, back in the mansion, Jonathan and Olivia continued their miserable lives, both of them trapped in the loveless marriage they had built for themselves. Jonathan, though consumed by his own guilt, never mentioned Jasmine again. And Olivia, still furious, made sure to erase any trace of the maid who had once lived under their roof. But little did they know, their paths would cross with Jasmine once more, and the consequences of their past actions would come back to haunt them in ways they could never have imagined. Years passed, and life in the grand mansion remained as cold and loveless as ever. Jonathan and Olivia continued their charade of a marriage, but there was no affection, no warmth between them. They were 2 strangers living under the same roof, each consumed by their own selfish desires. Olivia continued to maintain her appearance, attending glamorous parties and surrounding herself with high society friends, while Jonathan threw himself deeper into his work and various affairs. Yet with each passing year, a sense of emptiness began to creep into Jonathan's heart. Despite his wealth, power, and the freedom to live as he pleased, something was missing. The laughter of children, the joy of family. These things had never mattered to him before. But as he grew older, he started to feel the weight of his decisions. His brothers and cousins, all with children of their own, often spoke proudly of their families, and the pressure from his parents to produce an heir never ceased. Jonathan had hoped that eventually Olivia would change her mind about having children, but she remained steadfast in her refusal. Now, after nearly 20 years of marriage, Olivia's beauty began to fade, but her obsession with staying youthful remained strong. She would spend hours in front of the mirror, applying creams and potions, undergoing treatments, all to preserve the image of the stunning woman she once was. The irony was that she had maintained her figure, but her heart had become hollow, cold as the stone walls of their mansion. One evening, as Jonathan sat alone in his study, staring out the window at the city lights, a deep sadness washed over him. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and success, felt like a prison. His thoughts drifted back to the events of 5 years ago, to Jasmine. He hadn't thought about her in a long time, but now, for some reason, she entered his mind with an unsettling clarity. He remembered the day she had told him she was pregnant, the way he had dismissed her, threatened her, and let Olivia throw her out without a second thought. What had become of her? Was she still alive? What happened to the child, his child? For the first time in years, Jonathan felt a pang of guilt. He had spent so long ignoring the consequences of his actions, but now, in his loneliness, they haunted him. Across town, Jasmine's life had been anything but easy. She had given birth to triplets. 3 boys, each a mirror image of their father, with his strong features and dark eyes. They were her pride and joy, but raising them alone was a struggle beyond anything she had ever imagined. After her mother's death, Jasmine had taken to hawking on the streets to survive, selling anything she could get her hands on just to feed her children. She carried the boys on her back and in her arms as she walked through the busy markets of Atlanta, calling out to passers-by to buy her wares. The city was loud, chaotic, and unforgiving, but it was all she had. The boys grew up fast, learning how to navigate the tough streets, helping their mother with her small business as best they could. Despite the hardships, Jasmine was fiercely protective of her children. They were all she had left, and she made sure they knew how much she loved them. But the years of hardship had taken their toll. Jasmine's once bright eyes were now tired, her hands calloused from hard labor. She often wondered what her life might have been like if things had been different, if she hadn't been forced to leave the mansion, if Jonathan had treated her with kindness instead of cruelty. Sometimes she saw men who looked like him on the street, rich, powerful, indifferent to the struggles of people like her, and it made her heart ache. Yet, no matter how difficult life became, she never regretted keeping her children. They were her light in the darkness. One hot afternoon, as Jasmine and her boys were weaving through the crowded traffic, hawking their goods to the drivers stuck in gridlock, something unexpected happened. A sleek black car pulled up to a stop, and from the window, Jasmine heard a familiar voice calling out to her. "You there, young woman? Come here." She turned, her heart skipping a beat. It was Jonathan. Jonathan hadn't expected to see her. He had been driving through the chaotic streets of Atlanta, lost in thought, when he spotted her, Jasmine, standing there with 3 boys who looked eerily familiar. His breath caught in his throat. Could it be? After all these years? He ordered his driver to stop the car, his eyes fixed on her as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Jasmine, now standing in front of the car, looked into the window and saw Jonathan's face. She froze. Memories came rushing back. Memories of that terrible day when he had thrown her out, when he had denied his own child and threatened to ruin her life. She felt a mixture of fear, anger, and confusion. What did he want from her now? Jonathan stepped out of the car, his heart racing the moment he saw the boys. There was no doubt in his mind. They were his sons. Each one of them bore his resemblance, and the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had a family he had abandoned without a second thought. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Jasmine held her boys close, her protective instincts kicking in. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. Jonathan's mouth was dry, his mind racing as he searched for the right words. "Jasmine, hey, I didn't know." "You didn't care," Jasmine shot back, her voice filled with the pain and anger she had carried for years. "You threw me out when I needed you the most. You let me fend for myself, and now you just show up like this?" Jonathan lowered his gaze, ashamed. "I'm sorry. I was a different man back then. I didn't realize what I was doing. I was selfish." Jasmine's eyes welled up with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "It's too late for apologies, Jonathan. I've raised these boys on my own. You don't get to just walk back into our lives and act like you care." The boys, who had been watching silently, looked up at their mother, confused but protective. They didn't know the full story, but they could sense the tension in the air. "I know I've done terrible things," Jonathan continued, his voice breaking, "but I want to make it right. Please, Jasmine, let me be part of their lives. Let me make up for everything I've done." Jasmine stood there, her heart pounding, trying to process what Jonathan had just said. The man who had once coldly discarded her and her unborn children was now standing before her asking for forgiveness. But how could she trust him? How could she believe that he had truly changed? The boys tugged at her dress, their young faces filled with curiosity. They had never known their father. Jasmine had never told them much about him. Now here he was, standing before them, looking at them with eyes that mirrored their own. They were only 5 years old, but they could sense that something important was happening. "Please, Jasmine," Jonathan said again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Let me make amends. Let me be a father to them. I know I can't erase the past, but I want to be part of their future." Jasmine's hands trembled. The anger and pain she had harbored for so long seemed to swirl within her like a storm. But beyond that anger was exhaustion. Years of struggling alone, fighting to provide for her children without help. Part of her wanted to turn her back on Jonathan, to leave him standing there in the street, but another part of her, the part that had always longed for peace, wanted to listen. "What are their names?" Jonathan asked, his eyes fixed on the boys. He had never thought to ask before, but now the question burned in his throat. "What did you name them?" Jasmine hesitated for a moment, then answered quietly, "This is Amari. This is Jalen, and this is Nico." Each boy stared at Jonathan with wide, curious eyes. Jonathan knelt down in front of them, his eyes wet with tears. He hadn't cried in years, but seeing the faces of his sons, his flesh and blood, broke something inside of him. "Amari, Jalen, Nico, I'm your father." The boys blinked at him, unsure of what to say. They had always imagined what their father might be like, but the man standing before them didn't seem real. He didn't seem like a father, more like a stranger who had wandered into their lives unexpectedly. Jasmine watched, her heart heavy with uncertainty. Could she really let Jonathan be a part of their lives after everything he had done, after all the years of pain and struggle? But then she looked at her sons, and something softened in her. They deserved to know their father. They deserved a chance at a better life. "Why now?" Jasmine asked, her voice breaking the silence. "Why do you want to be part of their lives now, after all these years? Why do you care?" Jonathan stood up, wiping away the tears that had gathered in his eyes. "Because I've changed, Jasmine. I'm not the same man I was. I know I was wrong, so wrong, and I've had to live with that every day. I can't take back the past, but I want to be better. I want to be the father they deserve." Jasmine studied him, trying to see if there was truth in his words. There was something different about him now. He seemed more vulnerable, more sincere than the cold and arrogant man she had once known. But could she trust it? "I don't know if I can forgive you, Jonathan," Jasmine said, her voice trembling. "You left me when I needed you the most. You let me struggle alone with 3 babies. I lost my mother because of it. I've had to fight for everything, every meal, every piece of clothing on their backs." Jonathan hung his head, guilt pressing down on him like a weight. "I know," he whispered. "I know what I did was unforgivable. But please, give me a chance to be there for them now. I want to help. I want to make it right." For a long time, Jasmine didn't speak. The busy streets of Atlanta seemed to fade into the background as she stood there, torn between her anger and the possibility of a new beginning. Could she really allow Jonathan back into their lives? Would he truly change, or would he hurt them again? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jasmine spoke. "If you really want to be part of their lives," she said slowly, "then you have to prove it. Not with words, but with actions. I won't let you hurt them the way you hurt me. If you disappear again, they'll know who you really are." Jonathan nodded, relief washing over him. "I'll prove it, Jasmine. I swear I'll prove it. I want to be their father. I want to help you raise them." Jasmine glanced down at her sons, who were still watching Jonathan with wide eyes. She sighed, knowing this decision wasn't just about her anymore. It was about them. If Jonathan could provide them with a better life, if he could be the father they needed, then maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. "I'll give you a chance," she said, her voice firm, "but only one. If you fail them, Jonathan, if you fail us, then you'll never see us again. Do you understand?" Jonathan nodded, his heart swelling with hope. "I understand. I won't fail you, Jasmine. I promise." Over the next few months, Jonathan made good on his word. He visited Jasmine and the boys regularly, slowly earning their trust. He helped them financially, providing food, clothes, and better living conditions. For the first time in years, Jasmine didn't have to worry about how she would feed her children. The boys, too, began to warm up to Jonathan. Though it wasn't easy at first, they were cautious, unsure of how to feel about this man who had suddenly appeared in their lives. But Jonathan was patient, taking the time to get to know them, to play with them, and to show them that he was serious about being their father. As the months passed, Jasmine saw a change in Jonathan. He wasn't the same cold, arrogant man she had once worked for. He was softer now, more humble, more attentive. He showed genuine love and concern for his sons. And though it took time, Jasmine began to believe that maybe he truly had changed. However, things were far from perfect. Olivia, unaware of Jonathan's growing relationship with Jasmine and the boys, continued her own life of indulgence, oblivious to the changes in her husband. Jonathan knew that he couldn't keep this secret forever, and eventually the truth would come out. But for now, he focused on building his relationship with his children and earning back Jasmine's trust. One evening, after a long day of spending time with the boys, Jonathan pulled Jasmine aside. They stood outside her small home, the sun setting behind them, casting long shadows on the ground. "Jasmine," Jonathan began, his voice low and serious, I want to do more for you and the boys. I want to give you a better life." Jasmine crossed her arms, still cautious despite the progress they had made. "We're doing fine, Jonathan. The boys are happy and we're getting by." "I know," Jonathan said, "but you deserve more. They deserve more. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I want you to come back to the mansion with the boys. You deserve a better home, a better life, and I want to provide that for you." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. The thought of returning to that mansion, the place where she had suffered so much, filled her with fear and uncertainty. But at the same time, she knew that Jonathan was offering her and her children a chance at a life she could never give them on her own. "Jonathan, I don't know," Jasmine said, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure I can go back there." Jonathan took a step closer, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I know it's hard, but things are different now. I'm different. I want to make things right. Right, Jasmine? Please, let me give you and the boys the life you deserve." Jasmine looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception. But all she saw was a man who had changed, who had finally realized what truly mattered. "All right," she whispered. "We'll try." Jasmine's heart pounded as she stood outside Jonathan's mansion once again. It had been years since she had set foot in this place, and the memories of her time here flooded back, each one more painful than the last. But now she wasn't alone. Her boys, Amari, Jalen, and Nico, stood by her side, holding her hands tightly. They looked at the enormous house with wide eyes, their young faces filled with awe and curiosity. Jonathan opened the grand door, his expression a mix of relief and nervousness. "Welcome," he said softly, stepping aside to let them in. "This is your home now." Jasmine hesitated for a moment before stepping over the threshold. The house was just as she remembered it. Lavish, cold, and far too big for one family. But this time something was different. There was warmth in Jonathan's eyes as he watched her and the boys, a warmth she had never seen before. As they settled in, Jonathan did everything he could to make them feel comfortable. He had arranged new rooms for the boys, filled with toys and books, things they had never had before. He spent time with them every day, playing games, helping them with their schoolwork, and telling them stories. Slowly but surely, the boys began to accept him as their father. For Jasmine, it was harder. She couldn't forget the past, the way Jonathan had treated her, the way he had abandoned her when she needed him most. But she saw the effort he was making now, not just for their children, but for her as well. He apologized again and again, and though the words couldn't erase the pain, they helped to heal the wounds. Little by little, Jonathan had made a decision. He was done living a lie. He had realized that his marriage to Olivia was nothing more than a hollow shell, built on pride and wealth. It wasn't real, and it never had been. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Jonathan approached Jasmine, his face serious. "There's something I need to do," he said, sitting down beside her in the living room. "I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I can't keep living like this. I need to end things with Olivia." Jasmine looked at him, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I'm going to ask her for a divorce," Jonathan said, his voice firm. "This marriage, it's not real. It hasn't been for a long time. I married her for the wrong reasons, and I've been miserable ever since. I want to be free, and I want to be with you and our children." Jasmine's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. Even though Jonathan had changed, she hadn't thought he would take such a drastic step. "Jonathan, are you sure? What if she doesn't agree? What if she tries to make things difficult for you?" Jonathan shook his head. "I don't care anymore. I've lived my whole life caring about what other people think, about wealth, about status. But none of that matters. What matters is you, Jasmine, and our children. I want to do what's right for us, and that means leaving this loveless marriage behind." Jasmine's heart softened as she looked at him. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the determination to make things right. It was a far cry from the man he had once been, the man who had hurt her, who had abandoned her. But now, standing before her was someone different, someone who had learned from his mistakes. The next morning, Jonathan called Olivia and asked her to come home. When she arrived, she was surprised to see Jasmine and the boys in the house. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice cold and sharp. "What are they doing here?" Jonathan stood tall, facing her without fear. "We need to talk, Olivia." Olivia narrowed her eyes, her anger barely concealed. Talk about what? Why is she here? What are those children doing in my house? Jonathan took a deep breath, steadying himself. Jasmine is here because I asked her to be. Those children, Imari, Jalen, and Nico, are my sons. Olivia's eyes widened in shock. Your sons? What are you talking about? Jonathan didn't hesitate. He explained everything. The affair, the pregnancy, how he had wronged Jasmine and abandoned her when she needed him the most. He told Olivia about the boys, how he had met them in Atlanta traffic, and how he had come to realize that they were his. He told her about the change he had undergone, how he wanted to be a father to his sons and build a real family with Jasmine. Olivia was furious. So you cheated on me with the maid, and now you expect me to just accept this? She spat. I will never agree to a divorce. You'll regret this, Jonathan. I'll make sure you lose everything. Jonathan stood his ground, his voice calm but firm. I don't care about the money, Olivia. I don't care about the status. All I care about is my family, the family I have with Jasmine and our boys. I want a divorce, and I won't stop until I get one. Olivia glared at him, her face twisted in anger. You think you can just throw me away? You'll regret this, Jonathan. But Jonathan didn't back down. He had made his decision, and nothing Olivia could say would change his mind. I'll handle whatever comes, but I'm done living in this lie of a marriage. I want to be free. After a long and bitter legal battle, Jonathan was granted his divorce. Olivia, furious and vengeful, tried to take as much as she could in the settlement, but Jonathan didn't care. He let her have the money, the property, the status symbols she so desperately clung to. All he wanted was to start over with Jasmine and their children. The day the divorce was finalized, Jonathan stood outside the courthouse feeling lighter than he had in years. He turned to Jasmine, who was waiting for him with the boys. A smile spread across his face as he walked toward them. It's done, he said, relief in his voice. We're free. Jasmine smiled back, though her heart still carried the weight of everything they had been through. But for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. They had a long road ahead of them, but now they could walk it together. As Jonathan knelt down to embrace his sons, Jasmine felt a sense of peace wash over her. The past could not be undone, but the future was theirs to shape together. They would build a new life, a life of love, of family, of hope. And as the sun set on that chapter of their lives, Jasmine knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged.